Hello. In this video, I'm going to do an example reviewing the basic operations on vectors. The question gives us two vectors, u, which is 1, 2, negative 1, and v, which is negative 1, 1, and 0. And the question asks to find sum of the vectors. It has 4 parts. Part B asks find 3u, part C, u minus v, and part D, do 2u minus 3v. So let us start with part 1, the summation of vectors. If you have two vectors, u, the component, and v with 3 components, then sum of these two vectors, u and v, is a new vector whose first component is sum of the two first components, so u1 plus v1. The second component of u plus v is sum of the second components of the vectors u and v, so u2 plus v2. And the third component is sum of the third component, so u3 plus v3. So let us do the thing here. Now, the first component of u is 1 plus the first component of v, which is negative 1. That's the first component of addition. The second component of u plus v is the second component of u plus the second component of v. And the third component is a sum of negative 1 and 0. Now I can simplify this. 1 plus negative 1 is 0. 2 plus 1 is 3. And negative 1 plus 0 is negative 1. That sum. Now, part B asks to find 3u. This is scalar multiplication. I have a number. I want to multiply it to a vector. That's called scalar multiplication. And this is how we do scalar multiplication in general case. So you multiply C to each component of u. So CU1 gives you the first component, CU2 gives you the second component, CU3 gives you the third component. In this case, C is 3, and I can do 3 times the first component, 3 times the second component, and 3 times the third component. Then do operation, simplify, and you get the vector 3u. 3 times 1 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. Part C asks to find u minus v. U minus v is again a vector. And to obtain that vector, we do subtraction component-wise, as we did for the last two operations. Meaning that the first component of u minus v is u1, the first component of u, minus the first component of v. The second component is subtraction of the second component. The third component is subtraction of the third components. So in this case, u minus v is 1 minus negative 1. The second component is 2 minus 1. And the third component is negative 1 minus 0. Again, simplify the components now. 1 minus negative 1 is 1 plus 1, which is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, and negative 1 minus 0 is negative 1. The last part asks to find a combination of all these parts. So 2u minus 3v. What we have to do, we have to do first multiplication, so a scalar multiplication here, 2 times u and then 3 times v. Then I will have two vectors and then I subtract them. So let us do this step by step. So first, let us do this scalar multiplication. So scalar multiplication, we do it component-wise. In this case, I have 2 multiplied to each component of u. So 2 times 1, 2 times 2, and 2 times negative 1. That's my vector 2u. Minus 3 times, so let me write it, 3 times v. So 3 times to the 3 times component, 3 times negative 1, 3 times negative 1. 3 times 1, and then 3 times 0. Now I have two vectors and I have to subtract them. Subtraction of vectors, you have to do it component-wise, as I explained here. So first component minus the first component of the second one. So the first component is 2 minus first component of the second one is negative 3. Second component is 2 times 2, which is 4, minus 3 times 1, which is 3. The third component is negative 2 minus 0. And the result, as you can see, is 2 minus negative 3 is 2 plus 3, which is 5. 4 minus 3 is 1, and negative 2 minus 1 is negative. Okay, so this was an example and a very quick review of basic operations on vectors on R3. And I just want to wrap up with, again, another point about these operations. All these three operations are done component-wise, meaning that if you're adding, you add the corresponding component and put at the same spot. Sum of the first component in the first spot, sum of the second components in the second component, and sum of the third components in this third one. Do exactly the same thing. For scalar multiplication, do multiply the scalar number c to each component, and for subtraction, you subtract all three components.